Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today I've got a fun conversation for you. I'm talking with Scott Carson. Scott Carson is the founder of a company called MRP based out of Park City, Utah. MRP is the largest servicer and distributor of used laser or energy-based devices, including radio frequency microneedling, including cool sculpting, and they're providing an invaluable service to clinicians to help to maintain the energy-based devices in their clinic. The reason that I wanted to sit down and talk with him today is because there's a new phenomenon that's kind of emerging on the market that is a threat to consumers, it's a threat to clinicians, and that is counterfeit devices. And that might sound like an impossible thing to counterfeit something as big and technical as a laser, but it's happening. And I wanted to dive into that phenomenon so that as a consumer, you know how to protect yourself. If you're a clinician, whether you're a dermatologist, plastic surgeon, or working at a med spa or cosmetic clinic in any other capacity, you protect yourself, your business interests, and the patients that you're serving. So welcome to the channel, Scott.
Dr. Tyler, good to see you, and thanks for having me. Anxious to dive in and share what we've seen over the last couple of months.
I think there's a lot of fun stuff to discover and to discuss, and the most part, I wanted to kind of get this topic out there for consumers because I have patients that will come to me because they had a filler complication somewhere and they don't know what filler was injected into their face or the name of the injector. And I know that that kind of stuff can happen with lasers too. They may come in and they don't know what laser was fired. They don't know who the operator was. And what we're finding is, as I own my practice, I'm getting emails all the time from these companies that are making counterfeit devices. And I know that they're getting into the market because the price is ridiculously cheap. And a patient may not be getting the treatment that they think they're getting, and that can impact the way that I care for them if they're coming to me for a complication.
So I don't believe that the industry, both patients and clinicians, appreciate or understand the magnitude of the counterfeits that are coming into North America, specifically Canada and the US. And the borders are very secure for the most part when it comes to devices getting through for FDA compliance and also customs compliance. However, those rules primarily serve the people following the rules. Mm-hmm. So if you're not following the rules, then those protections, customs and FDA, are very porous. And I'll give you an example of that. So when we import a device, we tell the FDA and customs what it is. And we have to have the right regulatory numbers, and there's many, to bring those devices in. However, many manufacturers globally will import devices either as something else, maybe a microwave, or what they'll do is they'll import it through a device set of numbers, such as accession numbers or FDA registration numbers or FDA 510K numbers that are actually for a device that is, but that's not the device that's currently FDA cleared. So for example, there's a manufacturer in Asia right now that has FDA clearance on a number of devices, yet they flooded the US market with microneedling devices that are not FDA cleared, using their FDA number to ship those boxes through. The FDA does not have the capacity, nor does customs, to open all those boxes.
Right.
So hundreds and hundreds of inexpensive, untested, unsafe microneedling devices, microneedling RF, have hit the market. The bigger concern isn't just the concern being obviously it's the wrong device. We don't know if it's been properly tested, calibrated, safety inspected, electrically inspected. The bigger problem people don't understand is the needles themselves, in this case, are also coming through. And nobody knows what the genesis is of the steel that's being used. And so you're seeing, and I'm seeing this for some of the clinicians reaching out to me, lots of infections and significant skin irritation due to the quality or the consistency, the composition of the metal being used in these needles, and maybe not even being sterilized.
Yeah, it poses a huge risk to patients. And even if the customs inspector was opening it up, they may not know exactly what a GentleMax is supposed to look like, or an RF, it's got a number on it. That number is a cleared number and it looks legit. We're going to let it through, So
when you reached out, I thought I'd show some examples of the kinds of things that we're seeing and kind of get your reaction to it. So
yeah,
several weeks ago, a dermatologist, one of your colleagues, reached out to me and said, I found a really good deal on a Photona Dynamis SP. And these devices typically in the secondary market sell for well over 100,000. New, they're 180 to 240,000. And they're one of the probably the best energy-based devices that are made today. Photona is an excellent manufacturer, great clinical outcomes, and really designing some amazing technology. And he said, it's a really good deal. It wasn't too good of a deal, but it was enough that it just kind of got his interest. And I immediately looked at it and said, it's just too low, and so there's something wrong with it.
Yeah.
And he said, would you do me a favor, and would you go ahead and buy it and get it in and inspect it, and if it's what you think it is, I'll go ahead and buy it from you. I said, well, here's what I'll do. I'll bring it in because everything about it looks legitimate. The pictures, the serial number, but the price is a little off. I'll bring it in. I'm not going to pay for it, but I'll have the seller bring it in. We'll inspect it, and if it's not what we think it is, we'll send it back. And so I thought I'd show you. When it arrived, I took some pictures of it. This is just recently. I thought you'd get a cool kick.
And for my followers, while you bring that up, Scott Carson knows more about the inner workings of probably just about every energy-based device on the market. That's lasers, microneedling, RF microneedling, cool sculpting. As a company, Scott, would you guys say you're the biggest marketplace for reselling equipment and servicing equipment?
Yes. So MRP is the largest reseller of pre-owned energy-based devices in the world. We have over 800 energy-based devices in the facility right now that are being reprocessed, over 10,000 handpieces, parts, and peripherals. We also migrated into new equipment in 2020, and we entered 22 with the largest new energy-based device product offering of any manufacturer distributor globally.
Yeah.
And so we've got probably the largest group of technicians in the country in our facility, energy-based device technicians, and some of the most skilled. So we're seeing all kinds of things. But
and I have no conflict of interest here with our discussion, but just to the viewers, I've purchased a couple of devices from you, and I've had you guys service devices for us, and I can certainly attest to the service, the quality, and the quality not only of the service that we get, but of the products that I purchased. So when you're about to show us all of this stuff, I want to just kind of give that background that you and your team, what you're looking at when you pop these things open, whereas I probably wouldn't. If I popped it open, I wouldn't know the difference necessarily between a counterfeit and the real deal.
I appreciate that. We have an amazing team, and I'm really grateful for the hard work these guys do every day. But you're exactly right. It is difficult to see this. This one that I threw up isn't so hard to identify, but Photona's tagline is "Choose Perfection," and I'm not sure you can see that.
I mean, if you're going to counterfeit, why not go all the way and just get the tagline?
Right. So this one is they had a little struggle with spelling, and so I thought I'd show a couple more here I got that are kind of interesting.
Yeah, I probably would have picked up on that one.
And this is to your point just a moment ago about you may not understand what the difference is. So this is a picture of what's called a computer pattern generator or a scanner. And this is off on that same Photona device. And so at first glance, you would look at this and say, okay, this looks like the right kind of handpiece. This is not a Photona device. And interestingly, this is the exact same scanner that is used on dozens of devices made in a certain part of Asia. And so this is not of the same quality of a Photona device. And here's the scary part, Dr. Patella, that I don't think people really understand or appreciate is no one knows actually what the laser cavity is. And so no one ultimately knows what energy is coming out. So several weeks ago, we had a Candela GentalMax Pro, which is clearly in the facility, one of the leading hair removal systems on the planet, 755 Alexandrite, 1064. And from 10 feet, it looked like a Candela GentalMax. But up close, it looked fake. You could pretty much see it, even though it said Candela all over it. Now, here's what's concerning about this device, is that when we opened it up, A Candela GentleMax Pro has two cavities. It has a 755 Alexandrite for lighter skin hair removal and has a 1064 long pulse for darker skin hair removal. And when we opened it up, it had one cavity, not two.
Mm-hmm.
And when you switched the energies from 755 to 1064, nothing changed. It was firing the exact same energy out of the brick, the cavity, in either setting. So maybe you could share with the group how dangerous that is. First off, not even know what the energy is, but let's say it is 755. What could be the possible contraindications or kind of physical damage that could occur from that?
Yeah, and this is something we've talked about on my channel before, understanding the physics of lasers, where you have a wavelength, and you know, I talk about how lasers are sexy but dumb. They, you know, it's one wavelength of light, and it's really good at doing one thing, but it's, you know, not able to do many things, and that's why we have many different devices, because each wavelength can serve a different purpose. So when we're talking about laser hair removal, that 755 nanometer range is really good at targeting dark hair and pigment. You know, you can really have a great treatment with that. However, the laser just sees pigment and it heats that pigment. And so it works well if you have dark hair and it gets down to that hair bulb, gets rid of the hair, and it can pass through that skin. But if you have a darker skin type, you know, Fitzpatrick 3, 4, or higher, when that laser fires at 755, it's going to hit anything that's pigmented, and that's going to leave burns on the skin. So if you have darker skin, it's just going to burn your skin as well as the hair, which is why we need to do a higher wavelength for darker skin types for laser hair removal. And that's where the 1064 comes in, because that can penetrate deeper without heating the pigment in the skin and then heat the pigment in the hair follicle. So if we don't know what wavelength that laser is firing, maybe it's only firing a 1064, and that'll be safe for a darker skin type. But if that's sold to a clinician who has a lot of darker skin type patients, and it's actually a 755 only, they're going to make that change and tune the settings in and be completely deceived. They're going to burn the patient. The patient will have permanent scarring, long-term complications, and the clinician probably gets sued in that case.
That is absolutely frightening. And I hadn't thought about, until you said that, the risks associated with the 755 on that darker skin type. Because or what if it happens to be 1064 light coming out and we're firing on lighter skin? Just the concerns are significant. I don't think also, you know, this people understand the magnitude of the issue. And I thought it was somewhat interesting today when we were getting ready to talk, and I'm actually going to show the email because it's almost not, it's just interesting that it came this morning. We get so many requests to fix these devices. We've actually now had to, you know, and I'm not just saying counterfeit devices, but we get hundreds of calls a week for servicing energy-based devices around the US. Not necessarily ones we've sold, but for all of our customers and referrals. And this was this morning. This is a email to our head of service, which he sent to me, which we're now starting to track these. And this is somebody that has, interestingly, a Photona that they got from China. And it's currently, they pressed the emergency stop button accidentally, and it shut down and won't come back on. And so here, this is a real issue, is we can't fix it. Actually, no one can. We surely can't even touch it. It's a adulterated device in the eyes of the FDA. If we were to touch it, the amount of liability that would find its way to us is extraordinary. And there's nothing you can do with this except really call the FDA or have it destroyed.
Yeah.
And so I just thought it kind of interesting to see that this isn't something that happens once in a while. This is starting to happen a lot.
They're preying on young clinicians and med spas when margins are tight and it's a competitive market, and you're shopping around, and these new laser companies make amazing devices. And I've got a new device in my office that I love. But, I'm 5 years into practice. I could afford that purchase. But, 3 years ago, I couldn't afford that purchase. And I get emails every day about these, a $5,000 CO2 laser, a $4,000 IPL. And you start wondering, like, oh, could this get me into that market earlier than I might be able to afford? And it's unwitting clinicians that don't know the difference, and it really then gets pushed onto an unknowing clientele. And I just was gonna maybe pick your brain a little bit, is what can a consumer do when they walk into a place to get a treatment? Maybe they're getting a Groupon laser hair removal treatment or something. What do you think a consumer can do to protect themselves when they're really putting the trust in the hands of the clinician?
Dr. Patel, that's a great question. And I've spent some time in the last couple of months thinking about it as we've started to see the velocity of these counterfeit and fraudulent devices coming into the country. And unfortunately, I don't have an answer. Even for us, again, from 10 feet, they look very good. And they're going to continue to get good, and they're going to get better. And honestly, you can't see a lot of the engineering until you take the covers off. Covers are relatively inexpensive to make and copy. The underlying engineering is a lot harder. So this is really challenging for a consumer, a patient, to really understand. Also, there's another problem with even good clinicians. I mean, very smart, intelligent, savvy, with good business acumen, sometimes are defrauded. And as you go back to the example I made in the beginning of our discussion, I showed you a photona that had come to us from a clinician that was given pictures of a real photona and a serial number of a real photona, but what was shipped was a fraudulent one. Uh-huh. So it's very challenging, and I wish I had a better answer. The only thing that I can really reference is something that you touched on a moment ago. I think it has a lot to do with the caliber and the experience of the clinician, because the more experienced a clinician is and the stronger their personal brand, they have a greater risk to that brand if they don't do the due diligence on the devices they're using. So I think it's important that people realize there are subtle ways to make sure that you're getting on best-in-class technology.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. And, if you're going to a new place you've never been before, I think it's okay to ask, how many treatments have you done with this laser? Have you had any complications? Because if it's a brand new laser and they're advertising on Groupon to try to start making money, and you're one of the first ones through the door, it could be totally fine if it's an experienced clinic. But, if they're trying to push a new treatment, especially maybe if you weren't even considering that, you went in for a consultation, just ask the questions. You're not going to offend anybody. And I would say if you ask those kind of questions and the clinician gets offended, I wouldn't get treatment there anyway. I'm more than happy to answer and tell my patients, this is where I bought this laser and I've been using it for 2 years and it's functioned great. I always do a test spot, a test fire before we actually start your treatment. Those are the kinds of things that, even though I can look, I know the settings, I know exactly what the laser should do. Every time I'm going to hit that laser on a tongue depressor to make sure it fires exactly the pattern that I know it's supposed to with the settings that I have in. So it's like a pilot flying an airplane. There's a checklist I go through every time. And those are the kind of questions you can ask a treating clinician. What is your process so that I don't have a complication here?
Great things. I'm gonna add one more to it. And I know that you take great care of your equipment, and I know that the vast majority of our customers globally take care of their equipment. And this is going to be a difficult thing for a patient to ask, but you have every right to ask a clinician to look at their preventive maintenance schedule and look at the service report on when it was last serviced and calibrated. Typically, that's done every 6 to 12 months. Typically, depending on the device, it's done once a year. And that's to the benefit of the clinician to keep that expensive device operating efficiently. Often these preventive maintenance are built into the service contracts that clinicians pay for. And there's nothing wrong with the patient asking for that. If I had any doubt about the quality or the legitimacy of a device that was in a clinic, I would have no concerns about asking for a preventive maintenance log on that device.
Yeah.
And it's no different if you think about it than airplane logs or other devices that are being used. If you're traveling in it, you have every right to look at the logs and the service history to make sure that it's safe and ready to fly.
Yeah, I mean, I've never done it, but every time you step on an elevator, there's a little sign that says, the certificate and maintenance are, kept in the lobby at the hotel or whatever. And, I suppose you could ask for that, but I've never taken the time to do it. But it shows you that it's there, it should be done.
Yeah, I don't think there's a risk of, I don't think there's been enough of a risk in the past. The counterfeit market is going to migrate to where the profits are.
Yeah.
And the profits in energy-based devices vastly exceed Louis Vuitton bags and Yeezy tennis shoes, and so we're going to see this explode over the next couple of years, even bigger than it already is.
Yeah.
And we're going to see some really significant damage if we don't get ahead of this and patients start to ask better questions, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's an emerging threat that consumers need to be aware of at this point. I know, a lot of clinicians are, if you're getting these emails, but they may not know that these devices are not actually what you're paying for. And we have, talked a little bit outside of this podcast episode that's one of the things I want to do is purchase these devices and, just fire them, at a piece of wood and just kind of show the differences between here's what I bought from Scott, here's what I bought from Sciton, and here's what I bought from this other company. And just show that it's not doing the same thing. It'd be entertaining for me and hopefully for a consumer, but it's a new and emerging risk that consumers and clinicians need to be aware of.
No question. I think the concern I have there is we don't even want these devices in our building, because they're coming through. And I candidly, I'm sure we'll have a chance to investigate this in the next couple of months. But we're not sure what the process is for an adulterated, modified, counterfeit, energy-based device. We just don't know yet. Again, this is how new this is and how significant this problem is becoming. One more thing I wanted to point out is, in talking to clinicians about this, they will tell me, oh yeah, I bought this Candela Gentle Max or this Fotona Dynamis or whatever, we see a lot of Sciton, you mentioned that, counterfeit devices. And I'll say, but you understand that's not FDA cleared. It doesn't have a 510K number. And they'll say to me, well, Scott, it says FDA written on the arm, or it says FDA written on the box.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, that doesn't mean that it is. And so these counterfeiters are starting to put these kinds of brands to legitimize what isn't legitimate. So again, this is a level of concern and fraud that we're seeing that's pretty significant. And I guess where I'm leading into is, what have you seen with your clinicians? What are you starting to hear, since this is such a new thing? What's coming up in your boards and discussions? And
there hasn't been a lot. I remember earlier on, as when I was younger in my practice, we had just opened up, and I was starting to get all of these messages on LinkedIn. And once your number gets onto WhatsApp with one of these companies, because I bought some power procedure chairs from one of these companies, and they work great. They were 25% of the cost of what I paid for the US made ones. They work perfect, but I'm not putting an energy into a patient with that. I felt very comfortable. But just simply getting my information into the hands of one of these companies, I'm bombarded with these requests. And so I took it to the message board of dermatologists, and I said, hey, I'm getting all of these requests from this company every week when the new reps are contacting me. Has anybody ever purchased a device from these guys? Because it's definitely sounding too good to be true. And at that time, nobody had purchased a device from them in the board certified dermatologist group. And that was reassuring to me that nobody had done it yet. But I don't know what the med spa world looks like, where depending on your state, it can be a little more loosey-goosey with regulations. And so,
there's another kind of just an issue that I think that this podcast and this discussion hopefully will crack open this debate, because what I know about all clinicians, and this isn't limited to dermatologists, I'm speaking about all of you as a group, rightly so, you're very proud given the educational and business accomplishments you have to get to this point of serving patients. And often what I find is when a mistake is made, it's generally not publicized. It's something they keep close to the vest and don't want to discuss because they feel like maybe they were the only ones.
Yeah.
And so hopefully this initial podcast on this issue will hopefully start a discussion and we can begin to shut this down. Because it's only through debate and discussion are we going to find where the angles are that they're using to get these devices in, so we can notify the FDA to begin to shut it down. Because I think this is going to accelerate, not decelerate.
I agree with you.
Because these guys are making potentially $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 in margin on a fraudulent Fotona. If they make it for a few, and by the way, these devices can be made for a few thousand US, brought into the country for a few thousand US, and they can take advantage of a clinician to the tune of 50, 60, 70,000. And so there's a lot of incentive for them to do this.
Yeah, and you shared some good tips. Somebody who has built a good brand. I can think of a handful of laser gurus around the country that are on the cutting edge of research, and those are the types of places you want to seek out to get your treatments because they're not going to be falling for this.
But let's say you're a clinician that isn't sure if you have a legitimate energy-based device. Maybe you bought it through a distributor or a rep or a reseller. It seems that everyone and their dog is getting in the laser reselling business because the barriers are so low and bringing in a lot of Asian and continental Europe and global devices. What would be maybe some things that you think that a clinician could do if they weren't sure if they owned a device that was actually made by the manufacturer that's label is on the box?
Well, you should understand what wavelength you're firing, and you should know what that targets. If it's going to target pigment, if it's going to target, hemoglobin, or if it's going to target water. So there's certainly ways you can test that, not on a patient. We've seen fun demonstrations on social media with a black balloon inside of a clear balloon, and if you fire, a tattoo removal laser, it should go right through the white balloon and pop the black balloon, for example, or just black ink on a magazine cover. You should be able to target that. So you could try that and see, does it hit the right target? Do you get a consistent, predictable response? Is it firing the same every time? I imagine if you really wanted to investigate thoroughly, you could go and get some pig skin, from the butcher or something like that and give that a try. So, I would just say, though, if you find yourself in that situation where you realize you've got a counterfeit device, don't fall for the sunk cost fallacy that I'm in it this far, maybe I can make it work, because harming a patient and getting a lawsuit is going to cost you a lot more. At that point, just swallow your pride, give Scott a call and say, how do I get rid of this thing and how do I not fall for this again?
You know what? You bring up two really good points that I hadn't thought about. And let me go through them in order. And then it also triggered a thought that I have on maybe some things to do. The first is I never thought about really testing the clinical outcome. And you're right. Eggplants and pig skin and all of these kind of safe techniques and using an eggplant to test clinical outcomes is a very safe way to see if you're getting the right clinical response. The second thing you said about swallowing your pride is I don't think clinicians understand the liability exposure that exists if somebody were to get injured. First and foremost, there is no manufacturer or individual that's going to stand behind you with liability insurance. So you are on your own. The second thing is that I don't believe that a jury is going to accept the fact that you didn't know. And so I think the amount of exposure is so significant for one problem. And then the potential brand problem if that patient goes to social associated with using that device. So I think I hadn't really thought about the magnitude of the risk, and I think it's significant. Thing I would say is you're always welcome to call me. I'll get one of our engineers on a call, and they will quickly tell you instantaneously if the device is legitimate or not.
Yeah.
We see them all here. They're all in the building. We know what they're supposed to look like and know what we're supposed to do, and we're happy to to take a peek and see if we can identify its legitimacy.
Yeah. And I have to say that about you and your team, is that you've been always incredibly generous with your skill and your expertise. And I mean, it could take a 3-minute FaceTime call, pop the cover off and say, "Ooh, you got a good one," or "Hey, I'd be real careful with that one."